I want to thank Arturo for that introduction, and I want to say before I get started that I didn't bring Eva Longoria with me today. I get that a lot nowadays. I want to thank your president, Alex Padilla, who looks like the future of this country. It's such an honor to be here with you. And I'm particularly touched to be here with Pauline Medrano today, whose father, Pancho, and my father were very close friends and co-workers for many years back in the state of Texas. This is not my first NALEO conference, and I am not going anywhere. I did not come with a series of prepared remarks. I simply wanted to come and talk about our shared experience. I look into this audience today, and I see the faces of so many people that I've spent my entire life working with to make this country a better place. I remember being at my first NALEO conference about 20 years ago, and what it felt like to sit in those chairs, what it felt like to be part of something that was bigger than myself. I was about 32 years old, and I'd just been appointed a transportation commissioner by a great governor of Texas, Ann Richards. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a movement. I remembered what it must have been like for Congressman Roy Ball and Harry Pachon to do their patriotic duty in 1976 and start this organization whose mission has only gotten more important as our influence has gotten more diverse and more prominent, and our challenges have gotten greater. Our voices need to be heard in every single state and every single community. That was made abundantly clear in last year's presidential election when President Barack Obama was reelected with 71% of the Latino vote. My story is not so different than your story. You see, I was raised in an activist family. My father, Henry, and my mother, Elida, believed that you earned your presence in this country. I'm wearing long pants today. That's actually me carrying a picket sign. My father would come home on Friday nights. I don't know if he had a little to drink or not, but he would come into our den and he would make us watch labor leader training films. I'm sure I was the only kid on the block who had to watch labor leader training films. And I remember this one film in particular. It was called The Inheritance. It was about the immigration movement, about people coming from Italy and Mexico, and how their collective contributions built modern-day America. And I will never forget one phrase that was repeated in that film. Freedom and opportunity are not your birthright. They were not handed to you on a silver platter. You have to work for them, fight for them, day and night for them, and every single day, you earn them all over again. Every single day, you earn them all over again. I'm not sure that at the age of 6 I understood what my mother and my father were trying to teach me, but I understand today that it was a very important lesson about politics in America, one that each and every one of you already know. That we have to work every day to secure the gifts of equality, and that we can never take them for granted. You only need to look at the headlines of this week's newspapers to know that that's true. I join everyone who stood on this stage today who said that our work is far from over. We need to grow our economy because each and every one of us has a member of our family or a loved one for whom the American dream is still a dream. That's why President Obama has helped businesses owned by Latinos by cutting taxes and getting grants approved so that we can grow our businesses. Over this last year, more than 10,000 SBA loans totaling more than $3.8 billion went to Hispanic-owned small businesses. We need to ensure that every American has access to quality and affordable health care. That is why President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, because he knew that Latinos have the highest uninsured rate of any group in the United States. And thanks to Obamacare, 9 million more of us will have access to affordable health care. Never again will our families have to wonder whether we can afford to take a sick child to the doctor or pay for the medication that we need to stay healthy. And we all know that we need to invest in the future of our young people. And that is why this president has made sure that our community is central to the efforts of advancing education opportunities for all Americans, focusing on early learning programs and Head Start so that every child entering school is ready to learn. And that's why President Obama doubled funding for Pell Grants, which has enabled nearly 2 million more Hispanic students to be able to afford college. And we need to fix our broken immigration system. That's why the Obama administration a year ago took the step of enacting an executive order that lifted the shadow of deportation from young people who came to the United States as children and who grew up as Americans. Make no mistake about it, the reason why we are talking about immigration reform is that the president ran on the issue of immigration reform. This week was historic, and I want to thank myself, the bipartisan coalition of senators whose votes have brought us one step closer to passing common sense immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship so that people living and working here have an opportunity to come out of those shadows. But all of us, Democrats and Republicans, have to make sure that our congressional representatives hear our voice and act in the best interests of our country and pass common sense immigration reform. And we know that we need to ensure, this group knows better than anyone else, that we need to ensure that every American is able to participate in democracy. That is why, in light of this week's Supreme Court ruling, President Obama has called on Congress to pass legislation that ensures every American has equal access to the polls. At the Democratic Party, we want you to be able to vote. That's why we're always going to stand on the side of those who defend access to the ballot for all eligible Americans. Because we know that too many of our families have fought and have died to secure that right. And our country is never worse off because more people decide to make their voices heard. You know, my mother used to tell me that you can't sit in two chairs with one set of nalgas. Because she understood that you can't say one thing and do another. So if anybody tells you that they recognize that the future of your children is important, then you can't let them double the interest rate on student loans. And if somebody tells you that it's a competition and they want to compete and they want to include you, they can't make it more difficult to vote. How many of you are from Texas? And they can't pass restrictive voter identification legislation. And if they understood what it was like to wonder whether you could pay to send your mother or your father or your abuelo or your abuela to a hospital, they wouldn't vote 37 times to repeal Obamacare. And I'm not here today because of any autopsy of the Democratic Party. Our outreach and engagement program is not a newfound phenomenon. This isn't the old Democratic Party or the new Democratic Party. We're just here to continue to earn your trust. So I hope that you view my selection as the finance chairman of the DNC as a small but important commitment to our community. I believe that no one should take us for granted. And I assure you that the Democratic Party doesn't. I also believe that we need to be our own best advocates for our community. I think there is an affinity, a connection between the founding of NALEO and the idea of a Futuro Fund. That we are part of a movement, and that while it started so many years ago, it hasn't ended. And you can't depend on any one individual, any one political party, or any president to ensure our future. No va a haber cambio si esperamos a otra persona o otro tiempo. Nosotros somos lo que estamos esperando y somos el cambio que buscamos. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. President Barack Obama said that. Nowadays, when I have a break, I go back to South Texas, and I sit on the back porch of my house in the 100-degree weather, and I gather my family around me the way that my father and my mother did so many years ago. And I stare into the face of the newest member of my family, a 5-month-old little girl by the name of Elida, named after my mother. And I think about the lessons that my mother and my father taught me, and the things that I've learned from you. And I think about my journey from holding that picket sign, struggling to hold that picket sign, and how my journey is not that different from yours, and how I wouldn't be here if it weren't for each and every one of you. And you have my commitment as a leader of the Democratic Party that you will always be heard, and that while our work is far, far from over, together we can make this country better, and we will together elect a Latino president of the United States. Thank you so much.
Henry, thank you for those comments, and once again, congratulations on your selection as the finance chair of the Democratic National Committee. I think last night at an event, our president suggested that it was, other than the chair, probably the most important position in any political party to be the one responsible for raising the resources and the revenue to run candidates. But I want to talk about the donkey in the room. Or actually the one that's missing. Okay? You know, the president has said many times, and we have watched yet another announcement of a cabinet secretary, and still waiting for that name of one that we recognize, somebody from our community, and not hearing it. He would say, wait till I'm done, and then you can judge how I've done on this. Well, we've been waiting, and so far there has been only one Latino who's been nominated. That's our good friend Tom Perez, a member of NALEO, who's come here before, and we strongly support his confirmation. I'm going to do everything we can to ensure his confirmation, but that still is only one Latino. Now, we're now at the point where we will have a presidential cabinet, depending on the outcome of this confirmation battle that we'll have, potentially with no Latino in the cabinet, and if we're fortunate, we'll only have one. We haven't had that, I believe, since around the Reagan years. What's going on?
Well, let me begin by saying Ken Salazar, a great environmentalist, a rancher, a United States Senator, and the Secretary of the Interior. Let me say Hilda Solis, the first Latina to serve in the cabinet. Let me say Nitza Quiñones, who's the first openly gay Latina federal judge. Let me talk about Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Let me assure you that this White House is committed to the confirmation of Tom Perez, the first Dominican member of a presidential cabinet. Let me talk a little bit about Cecilia Munoz, who is the first Latino or Latina to serve as the head of the U.S. Domestic Policy Council. Let's talk about Miguel Rodriguez, who is the head of the White House Legislative Affairs, and so many people like him who you may not read about on the front pages of the newspaper, but who represents the fact that in this administration there have been now more Latinos appointed in an administration than any administration before this, and those appointments have now exceeded any number of appointments who have received Senate confirmation. So the deputy secretaries and the assistant secretaries who make our government work. And let me also highlight the appointment of Catherine Archuleta, who was the first Latina to serve as the political director of a presidential campaign and who now will serve as the director of personnel management. Those are the people who make sure that we're represented in jobs at every level of the administration. Let me also acknowledge that you're right. And let me say that we need to continue to make sure that we're represented in this administration. There is at least one more appointment of a cabinet position still pending. Part of my work at the Futuro Fund was to make sure that beyond an election cycle, organizations like NALEO would do what, for example, they've done in the LGBT community through the Victory Fund, to make sure that our future leadership is identified, developed, and appointed or elected so that our issues can be represented. I am very proud of the administration of this president, but I know that we have a long way to go.
Let me pick up on the issue that Chairman Priebus raised about trying to engage Latinos more. We saw what happened in the last presidential campaign. It came down to 8 states. And the problem with that is when you ignore Latino voters in California and in Texas and in Illinois and in New York and in these other states that are not considered battleground states, that's nearly 70% of the Latino electorate. How can candidates look at these Latinos in the face and say, your vote matters, when I won't even go and campaign in your state? How is the party going to change that? How is this party going to engage Latinos in these states that every 2 and 4 years get ignored?
That is a very sensitive subject for me, being from the state of Texas, where we have felt many times like we were an ATM. We are now changing that. You know, the Democratic Party has always had a 50-state strategy. And I see Juan Sepulveda in the audience. I want him to stand for just a minute. It is. We did not in this election in any of the states take the Latino vote for granted. And one of the things that the president's re-election effort did really well was the combination of grassroots organization and digital organization, so that our votes at a community grassroots level, our involvement was heard and felt. That can be better. We have had conversations since January of this year when I took office to talk about what comes next, to talk about the development of the pipeline of leadership, to make sure that the Democratic Party is organized in a way in which even its culture, this party has a culture, that the culture of this party continues to change, to recognize our increasing influence. Before I walked into this room, I had some very good conversations with young leaders of NALEO about the importance of making sure at that level, in those states that are incredibly sensitive and important to our community, that we find a way to make sure and nurture and engage and involve our leadership. The only difference I would say is that this isn't a new phenomenon for the Democratic Party, and it can get better, and it will.
Well, it's not a new phenomenon, so that scares me, because you just said it's not a new Democratic Party, it's the same Democratic Party. So are we going to continue seeing this phenomenon then?
We're going to see a culture of the Democratic Party that continues to recognize the growing influence of Latinos, and that has and is mobilized and organized in a way to make sure that each of you in your jobs has an important role to play in the development of our issues.
Okay. Now, we're running out of time, but I want to ask you to take off your hat for a second as finance chair. I just want you to talk a little bit about Futuro Fund, because this was the first election in which that missing leg of the tripod. We've had voters, we've had policymakers, now we have people with money contributing to a campaign and having influence. What's the future of the Futuro Fund in terms of growing that missing element of Latino political engagement?
Latino influence on electoral politics is important in every single manner. I was quoted in the newspaper as saying, "No peso, no say-so," because my father taught me that every element of democracy is important. And in presidential politics, what our community had not successfully done before was make our presence felt through donations. I am very proud of the fact that the Futuro Fund raised over $32 million to re-elect President Barack Obama. 12 million of that came in large donations, and 20 million of that came in small donations from over 150,000 donors across the country. The future of the Futuro Fund is to continue to be a movement that works very closely with organizations like NALEO as a donor collaborative to make sure that our leadership pipeline is developed, that our future leaders are identified, that they are given the resources necessary to fulfill their opportunities, and that they and the allies to our community are elected and appointed to office.
Well, thank you, Henry. You know, I wish I could say we at NALEO would love to work with Futuro Fund, but just for the record, since Futuro Fund does have a partisan target, motivation, it's not one that a nonpartisan organization could partner with, but we do want to see you succeed in your role as finance chair, because these kinds of leadership roles of Latinos in either political party are an important expression of our political engagement. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Arturo, and thank you all.